Okay, so imagine this. You're standing at the edge of this vast uncharted ocean, the wind's howling with secrets, the clouds are swirling, mysteries everywhere. That was pretty much the world Carl-Gustaf Rossby faced. A world where the sky's movements were, well, as enigmatic as the deep sea. Today, we're diving deep into his life and work. Rossby, this visionary who just fundamentally transformed how we understand weather. We've gathered your sources on him, his life, his impact. And our goal here is to pull out those key insights, those aha moments, to help you see how one person can really truly change a whole field.
Yeah, that image, the uncharted ocean of the atmosphere, it's perfect, isn't it? It really captures what meteorology was like back then, turn of the 20th century. I mean, it was driven much more by just observation, less by deep theory.
Yeah.
And your sources really point out how Rossby showing up, with this strong background in mathematical physics, it just offered a completely new way of looking at things.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get into it. So born in Sweden, 1898, his early life seems marked by this real powerful curiosity. But breaking into the established scientific world, not so easy. He did get his philosophy licentiate in mathematical physics in 1925, which is, significant academically. But still, in that world of meteorology, which was pretty rigid, pretty traditional, he was seen as a bit of an outsider.
Exactly. The meteorological community back then had its ways.
Yeah.
Pretty set in stone. Rossby comes along, drawing on fluid mechanics, how liquids and gases move.
Yeah.
And armed with his math training, he just saw the atmosphere through a totally different lens. One of your sources quotes him saying you had to redraw the map. And that really sums up his whole approach. Question everything, reimagine the frameworks.
And that drive, that need to redraw the map, well, that led straight to his big breakthrough, Rossby waves. He was really inspired by Wilhelm Bjerknes, those core ideas of fluid mechanics. He had this insight, truly revolutionary at the time, seeing the atmosphere not as just random chaos, but as a restless ocean of air, governed by the same fluid dynamics that explain, say, ocean currents.
And what's so fascinating there is how he could connect these seemingly separate scientific fields, applying that kind of mathematical rigor from fluid dynamics to something as complex as the atmosphere. That was a huge leap. And discovering the waves themselves, well, that came from digging into the data, analyzing upper air data from the new radiosondes, those weather balloons, sending back info, right? Temperature, pressure, wind. That analysis was just pivotal. These massive slow waves in the upper atmosphere stretching across whole continents. They basically control the long-term weather picture. Their troughs often line up with where big storms develop and track. Well, the crests, more stable weather, they really did become, like one source says, the backbone of modern meteorology.
Wow. It's actually mind-boggling, isn't it? These invisible, continent-spanning waves just shaping our daily weather. But it wasn't exactly a smooth ride for Rossby, was it? He faced a lot of skepticism. Apparently, some colleagues saw him more as a promoter rather than a serious scientist. It sounds like maybe his enthusiasm, his skill at explaining complex stuff, some people saw that as a negative.
Well, that brings up something important about how new ideas often land, right? Rossby's described duality, part showman, part scholar, probably rubs some people the wrong way.
Yeah.
Sometimes, a dynamic personality gets mistaken for lacking scientific depth. But as your sources make really clear, the impact of the sheer validity of his work again and again proved his scientific seriousness.
Then World War II hits, and suddenly predicting the weather accurately becomes absolutely critical. Military operations depend on it. This intense pressure cooker, it really became a proving ground for his theories. He ended up playing a massive role in training military meteorologists. And his models, they had to be adapted fast for urgent, really high-stakes wartime forecasting.
And if you think about it, those times of intense crisis often push science and tech forward fast. The war, with its urgent need for reliable weather info, it created this real-world testbed for Rossby's ideas. High stakes. His leadership, pulling together brilliant minds at the University of Chicago, it turned the place into what one source calls a crucible of innovation. Apt description. That period saw major breakthroughs, understanding the jet stream better, how cyclones behave, all further cementing his influence.
And yet, even with all that vital wartime work, you still had these, rumblings of doubt from some administrators, still uneasy about his research, about what they saw as his flair for drama. It's amazing how those first impressions could stick around, even when his work was so clearly important.
It really does highlight a challenge, doesn't it? For anyone truly pushing boundaries, a visionary approach can feel disruptive, maybe unsettling within older structures. But Rossby seemed focused on the science, the practical applications, especially when lives were potentially on the line.
Right. So after the war, Rossby starts looking ahead at technology. He saw the huge potential in electronic computing, which was just starting out then. We're talking about those room-filling machines, really limited power compared to now. But he had the foresight to see how they could totally revolutionize weather prediction. He even led the charge to create the first European machine forecasting center. Using early barotropic models, basically simplified computer models of the atmosphere, often just one layer set, to generate the very first computer-based weather forecasts. Must have felt like a massive leap into the unknown.
Oh, absolutely. Just thinking about using these enormous, clunky machines for something as complex as weather forecasting. That
Yeah.
took incredible vision. His belief in innovation, his willingness to just jump in and use these powerful new tools, that really laid the groundwork for all the computational meteorology we rely on today for our forecasts.
Okay, then comes this shift later in his career, which might seem a bit surprising. He turns his focus to atmospheric chemistry. And your sources mention this was a field where, his background was thin, his reputation unproven.
hmm
So what was behind that? Why the big change in direction?
Well, I think that shift really tells you a lot about how Rossby saw the Earth system deeply. He realized meteorology couldn't just be studied in a vacuum. He saw the atmosphere as deeply interconnected, linked to oceans, land, life processes, everything. His motivation seems to be this conviction that to truly understand weather and climate, you had to see the atmosphere as a living, breathing system, constantly interacting with everything else.
And even though he didn't have deep formal training in that specific area, his institute in Stockholm quickly became a world-leading center for atmospheric chemistry. He was apparently working hard on a major book about these connections right up until he died, seeing the atmosphere as this key carrier of particles and chemicals in the Earth's whole geochemical balance. It's just, wow, shows his intellectual range.
It really does. It highlights that deep curiosity, that willingness to go beyond his known turf. It underlines his understanding that progress often happens where different disciplines meet, right? Bridging those gaps can lead to the big breakthroughs.
So when we look back, what's the lasting legacy of this guy, this storm chaser, as one source calls him?
Oh, the legacy is huge. Profound, really. First, he mentored a whole generation of meteorologists, passed on that mix of passion and relentless questioning. The American Meteorological Society's top award, the Rossby Research Medal, that's a direct tribute, still going. But fundamentally, he just reshaped the whole field. He revealed those invisible patterns, the waves that now let us predict storms, predict lives, plan ahead. He really changed how we understand this dynamic planet we live on.
Your sources bring up those earlier controversies again, though, that sometimes confusing dual personality. And even his move into atmospheric chemistry, some people apparently question that too. But it seems like ultimately Rossby just thrived on challenge. He truly believes science has to push boundaries, even if it makes people uncomfortable.
Exactly. And thinking about him through metaphors, that storm chaser image fits so well. He wasn't scared of the unknown or of navigating the often rough seas of scientific skepticism. And like the Rossby waves he found, his influence just rippled outwards, changing everything. It makes you think, doesn't it? What storms, intellectual, practical, are you willing to chase? What unseen patterns might be out there waiting for you to uncover in whatever you do?
It really does. And the big lesson here feels like a kind of call to action.
Hmm.
When you hit obstacles, when the usual ways aren't working, the message is clear. Don't be afraid to redraw the map.
Hmm.
Lean into the uncertainty, question the obvious, look for those connections others miss. Because, as one source put it so well, the sky is not the limit, it is the beginning.
Yeah, and that final question from your material, it really stays with you. What will you discover if you dare to look up, to question, to chase your own storm? Rosby's whole journey is just such a powerful example, like a wind at your back, pushing you toward that kind of bold inquiry.
So wrapping up this deep dive on Carl-Gustaf Rossby, the key takeaway really is how that mix intense curiosity, sheer perseverance against skepticism, and just being willing to challenge how things are done, how that can lead to truly world-changing discoveries, fundamentally reshaping how we see something even as, well, seemingly chaotic as the weather.
And it definitely leaves you thinking about those uncharted oceans in your own world, your own work. What maps might need redrawing there? What subtle, maybe invisible patterns could you be the one to spot if you just dare to look differently, to question?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.